Is it, you said it was sort of dreary where you are. Was it really snowy today?
It snowed like crazy on my end today. Absolutely. It snowed like absolutely wild. It's still pretty bad. I'm just seeing through the window that there's people slipping outside throughout my day. so so that's how it is on my end. I see people also coming in. Hello everybody.
Hello.
We're just gonna wait another minute while we have more participants coming in. Is it snowing where you are, Chris?
Yeah, it is. That's why I wondered here in Waterloo region. It was pretty snowy today. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's winter though. It happens.
It's
So
winter. Yeah, exactly. I guess what can we
mm,
expect? I mean, we had a few
I'm
sunny days, so I'm really happy about that.
yeah, yeah. Same here. We had like maybe 2 or 3 sunny days over the weekend, which was a really nice break from
Yeah,
literally everything else.
exactly. Yeah. No, I'm happy about that. Okay, I mean, so we're just a few minutes past 2, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I mean, obviously there's gonna be attendees that are gonna be a little bit late coming in and out, and that's totally fine. But we'll go ahead and get this show on the road. Um, so I'm located here in Toronto, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Acknowledging the land is an Indigenous protocol used to express gratitude to those who reside here and to honor the Indigenous people who have lived and worked on this land historically and presently. I do want to express that these acknowledgements allow us the opportunity to appreciate the unique role and relationship that each of us has with the land and provide a gentle reminder of the broader perspectives that expand our understanding of history and our privileged role in residing here. So I just wanted to make that land acknowledgement just to start us off. I do want to continue by saying thank you so much for joining us for PLEAC's first webinar of 2021, where we will be focusing on the topic of responding to sexual harassment disclosure. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Chris Martin. Chris is a workplace equity educator for the Sexual Assault Support Center of Waterloo Region. His main role is to implement an anti-sexual harassment, anti-gender inequity curriculum to enable businesses, organizations to move towards a more equitable workplace culture. So he brings 14 years of experience in social work, activism, public speaking, to Sask's 31 years of transforming the lives of survivors in their community. So that's just a little bit tidbit about Chris. The session, by the way, is being recorded. Everyone will receive the link to this recording after the webinar is done, as well as any additional resources or materials relating to Chris's workshop. So I will make sure to send that to everybody. If you have questions, and Chris might mention this a little bit himself as well, but please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or the chat function throughout the webinar. I think Chris would be happy to answer those maybe during, but also we will have time at the end. So we'll just keep an eye on that. Without further ado, Chris, please feel free to go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much and welcome folks. It's so nice to be here and it's so nice to be talking to so many people who are doing such important work. And also thank you to Hannah, one for organizing this, but for also, I really loved your land acknowledgement, your explanation of it. And it's nice not to be the person explaining why it's so important, but I would like to backpack on it. I'm in Waterloo Region, and this is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the neutral peoples. And I agree with you. It's really important to show gratitude. It's really important not to divorce ourselves from the land we come from and from who came before here, who is still here, et cetera, right? And recognizing that relationship and how colonialism really does play into sexual violence culture. So very important. So my name is Chris. You heard a little bit about me. I'm going to explain a little bit more. I'm going to explain a little bit about SASC, the Sexual Assault Support Center of Waterloo Region. And then we're going to talk about responding to disclosures. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And once I share my screen, I will say that I'm more than happy for folks to engage the whole way through. I'm more than happy for folks to save a question for the end. It's whatever feels good for you. And speaking of like doing what feels best for you, I want this workshop to be healthy and engaging. And I recognize that I can't possibly know the lived experiences and the intersectionalities of everyone who's in here listening to me right now. And so I want you to do whatever you need to do to make this information feel good for you. And like, we're going to be talking about sexual violence, right? We're going to be talking about sexual harassment. We're going to be talking about the trauma and the impacts the trauma has on our lives and our bodies and our culture, et cetera. And those are really big topics that can bring up really valid and really large feelings, okay? And so if that means you need to sit in that discomfort, if that's what feels good for you, that's okay. If it means that you need to tune out for a little bit or just completely drop off and go do something else, that's also totally cool. You know, this recording is available. We're also going to send a handout out afterwards. A handout out is a weird sentence, isn't it? We're going to send that out afterwards, and you can totally like engage with it then, right? So the Sexual Assault Support Center is primarily and first and foremost as a counseling agency for people of all genders who've experienced sexual violence, age 16 and up. And to that, we also have an anti-human trafficking program, as I'm sure many of you are well aware. Unfortunately, a large amount of human trafficking does happen in Ontario. And that's for folks age 12 and up. And so that's a little bit about us. We've been around since 1989. And before we get going today, I just want to tell you a little bit about this presentation. So I work in the Male Allies Department. And the Male Allies Department is, you know, for a lot of organizations, this is a new idea still, or an idea that hasn't yet been implemented, and that's okay. But the idea of the Male Allies side is like, men have traditionally been able to just completely opt out or opt into this conversation as it suited them. So if they didn't want to care about it, they just wouldn't. And that's kind of, unfortunately, a lot of the culture we still live in. And so this workshop, especially the beginning of it, was developed by SASC before I was even here. The responding to disclosures, the smart practices around it, having an intersectional feminist lens and a grassroots lens applied to these ideas is so vitally important. And I just want to recognize that, yeah, okay, I added some workplace stuff. That's my role here. But this presentation really was built on the shoulders of people who have been doing this work for way before men were ever even engaged in it in this way, okay? And so it's just really important to recognize that this is built on a long foundation of expertise and knowledge and frontline knowledge and strategic knowledge all coming together. And so with that said, I do want to point out that we do offer here in Waterloo Region a 24-hour support line, 519-741-8633. If you're local and you need that support, if someone you know is experiencing ongoing, current or historical sexual violence and you need support, we will totally support you. If it's like not entirely in our wheelhouse, we'll connect you to the person whose wheelhouse it is, okay? It's there for survivors and it will never leave you out in the cold, so to speak. And if you want to learn more, you can check us out at saskwr.org or the Male Allies program at maleallies.org. And so what is today going to look like? Really simple. We're going to examine disclosures of sexual violence. Then we're going to learn how to respond to disclosures of sexual violence. Then we're going to learn how to respond to disclosures part 2, also known as in the workplace. And you'll see as we go along, and this may not be a surprise to many of you listening, but you'll see that how you want to respond to a disclosure of sexual violence in your personal life is going to be slightly different in the workplace, because there are certain workplace laws that can, if not properly treated, can actually grind up and muddy the healthy process of responding to a disclosure. And so we're going to discuss that. Don't worry. If any of this stuff sounds abstract to you right now, I promise you we're going to break it down, okay? So before we begin, I just want to ask folks, and you're welcome to use chat or unmute yourself, but I want to know, why do you think people might not report sexual violence when it happens to them? Can anyone take any guesses? And I know to some of the folks who are in here, some of the partners, this is totally preaching to the choir. With that said, I expect great responses. So what do we think? So we have fear of repercussions twice in a row. Yeah, absolutely. Fear and embarrassment, totally. Job loss, scared to be fired. Nothing will happen if they report. Yep. Many others, right? So when I ask this question, it's not to gauge how aware you are or anything like that. Mindy says afraid they won't be believed. Absolutely, that's common. That's heard over and over again. It's scared of unfair investigations. Yes, absolutely. Biases, people not having the proper tools in their toolbox to respond, to investigate, to support. And we're going to talk about that. So when I ask this question, it's not because I'm like, oh, I need to find out how much they know. Okay. That's not why I'm asking. I'm asking it because I want you to recognize that all the things that people are saying in chat right now have already gone through someone's head before they even get to a point of sharing a disclosure with you, okay? And just a couple more. Harm comes from leaders. They may not recognize their experience as sexual violence. Yes, that's a really great point, and unfortunately very, very common. And fear of partaking in a triggering process. Just so folks know, if you want to type so everyone can see, you can go to where it says all panelists and put all panelists and attendees. If you want to only chat to myself and Hannah, just leave it under all panelists, okay? That way, if you need to like type something anonymously or whatever, you can send it to just us. If you want everyone to be able to read your comments, I can read it out. I won't read your name if it's just sent to me though, just so you know. Fear of partaking in a triggering process, normalized in workplaces and actions, absolutely. And so all these things have already went through a survivor's head before they even get to you to disclose. And so it's really important to recognize the journey that someone has already taken before you step into it, before they bring you on board, okay? They've already traveled a great deal of distance, and that has taken a great deal of courage and bravery just to get to you. Okay. And when I say courage and bravery, I don't mean that they're acting without fear. I think that bravery doesn't exist unless someone's fearful, yet they're choosing to move forward anyway. And so it takes a tremendous amount of energy for someone to share this stuff with you. And so it's really important to recognize that before we even start learning about responding to a disclosure. Okay. So let's examine disclosures of sexual violence. First of all, everyone responds differently. By the way, some of these are text heavy. You don't have to read them. I'm going to read them out to you. If you want to like stare outside to get away from staring at a screen all day, that's cool. Just listen in. Everyone responds differently. This was put first, and I think it deserves to be first. Okay, so there is this idea, and some of it is propped up by Hollywood, some of it is propped up by like news media, and then general consciousness that there is one type of survivor, and they're meek and they're crying and they can't talk fully, etc. It's like this weird idea of what a perfect victim or a perfect survivor looks like. So if you think that, I don't want you to think of yourself as a bad person, but what I want you to do is I want you to blow that idea apart. I want you to just forget it for a few moments, okay? Because everyone responds differently. And when human beings go through trauma, the experience is as unique as the individual themselves. And so there are some commonalities, and we are going to discuss them, but I think it's really important to recognize that the commonalities are not in a box. They are not, it's not an exhaustive list. And if someone doesn't fit your prescriptive idea of what a survivor looks like, that does not invalidate them as a survivor. Okay, so it's very important to recognize that, right? Examples, they might not want to talk about it at all, or they might talk about it a whole bunch or somewhere in between. Again, coping mechanisms, bringing it up may be very difficult, or they may be talking nervously and talking a lot, or none of those things. They may be comfortable sharing it with you. Okay, so all that, the whole gamut there is totally valid. A couple common things that you may see: depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, disordered eating comes up a lot, addictions comes up a lot. These are often bodies' responses to trauma / coping mechanisms / intermix of all of the above. Okay. One thing that's really important to recognize as well is disassociation and memory loss. So a lot of you folks in here are probably well aware of what happens to the human body when they go through trauma, but to really simply break it down, and I encourage you, there's tons of resources and free peer-reviewed research out there that you can Google this stuff if you're interested in it, around disassociation and memory loss with trauma. So basically, what's quite common when someone goes through trauma: amygdala takes over. Adrenaline comes from the stomach up through the heart, shoots into the brain, it shuts off the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And that prefrontal cortex is me talking to you right now. It's explaining things in terms that other people can understand. It's having meaningful conversations. It's making decisions based on what we would consider rational thought. Okay, the amygdala does not care about that. It cares about survival. The amygdala also does not care about time. As far as it's concerned, time does not exist. And so if you're wondering why someone can be triggered by something even years later, that's exactly why. Because when the amygdala takes over, it sometimes does not know the difference between the initial instance of trauma and you talking about it now. And so you get a lot of physical reactions, you got a lot of emotional reactions from that, okay? And so for a long time, we were taught that someone can't tell a full story from start to finish is a liar. Regarding sexual violence and responding to disclosures of sexual violence, that does not necessarily apply, okay? Our memories come in fragmented from trauma. We may forget something now, remember it later. We may remember the end first and the beginning last. Okay, and so it's really important when you're responding to disclosure to be extremely patient and non-judgmental, but we'll get a little bit more to that lately. And some of you folks talked about why people may not disclose. And low self-esteem and self-blame are absolutely up there, right? So low self-esteem, it could be something that someone already had before this. It could be a cause of an experience of sexual trauma. And of course, self-blame. Like we live in a society that blames victims of sexual violence for things that happen to them. It is so absolutely bizarre. You know, I just recently read Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and I watched the documentary about it. And in the documentary, they were showing clips from female police sergeants in the 80s saying, well, you know, this woman, she lived alone and she was assaulted and murdered. And, you know, frankly, she should have known better than to live alone. And like that was stuff that people were saying openly on national TV. And if you think that's like far removed in our history, it's not. There's examples right here in Canada, right? A judge, what was it, 5 years ago in Alberta, talked about how a rape survivor should have had her legs closed, right? And if this is shocking to hear, I don't mean to shock you. I just mean to make it very real that our society absolutely is a victim blaming society, and it still exists today. A little bit more of the impacts. People have an inability to focus, right? So things that may have been important to them previously now may not hold the same merit to them. It could get you wondering why. Why did this A student just drop out? Why did this person who is a great productive worker suddenly withdraw from activities, suddenly not do work the way that they used to, right? Changes in someone's behavior or sexual behavior. I want to expand on this one a little bit. Someone's response to trauma regarding their own intimacy and the way they experience intimacy with other people really ultimately isn't our business, is it? So if someone has been assaulted and as a response to that, you know, they go on or they start being more promiscuous, they start sleeping with more people consensually as their choice, that doesn't mean that what happened to them was not traumatic, okay? Someone's reasoning, whether it's getting power back, whether it's wanting to forget, whatever it is, there's thousands of reasons it could be. That's not our business, and it is absolutely not appropriate to make a judgment of a survivor because they choose to consent to sex after they've been assaulted. That's everybody's right as a human being, okay? Unfortunately, this judgment happens a lot. People go, oh, well, if you were really assaulted and it harmed you, you would never have been out there sleeping with people, et cetera. And this, I've literally read about this happening in cases where people aren't believed because of that behavior. And it is so unfortunate, and we have absolutely no right to do that. Loss of trust, problems in relationships with others, right? I mean, this is probably not a surprise to you. Someone betrays your trust, even on a like a friendship level, not even a sexual violence level, you're not going to trust them again as much, as quickly, are you? Right? It just gets deeper. The cut just gets deeper and wider the bigger the trauma is to the person. And when I say that, I don't mean to rank harm. We're not ranking harm here. Trauma is, again, unique to the individual, right? So as big as the trauma is unique to them, that means that the bigger the impacts are likely to be, okay? Changes in sleeping and eating behaviors, again, very common. Trouble sleeping. Suicidality is also something that, you know, this should be no surprise. When someone feels like there is no light at the end of the tunnel, that they are completely powerless and helpless, suicide becomes a really viable option for them. And it's important to recognize that that option looks very viable to them. It may seem completely out of the question to you when you're in a healthy state of mind, right? When you're thinking rationally, but keep in mind that their version of rational thought may be different than yours. And so this is also really important. We're going to talk about this when we get to the workplace stuff, but it's very important to let people know that support is available regardless of the outcome of anyone believing them, of the outcome of the investigation, whether charges are pressed, whether punishment or corrective action is taken against the perpetrator, etc. We need to make sure that support is offered and known to help combat the idea that someone has nowhere to turn, okay? Also, I want to hold space for the next like 2 or 3 minutes specifically about men and boys. Okay, we know that sexual violence is a very gendered crime. I have some stats later on that will prove that if you weren't already aware of it, but I'm sure you were. But that does not mean that men and boys do not experience sexual violence. Okay, it absolutely does. Are we talking about the majority of the problem today? sort of, okay? But I also want to make it really clear that men and boys experience this stuff too. And it is our patriarchal society that tells them that they can't talk about it, that they can't come forward. And one of the big reasons for that, anger and aggression, the two emotions that men and boys are taught that is cool for them to have, that is acceptable for them to have, right? I'm allowed to be, upset. I'm allowed to be peeved off. I'm allowed to speak openly against something in an angry way as a man. And I think that that's wild. That it's societally acceptable for me to speak about that stuff. It is not societally acceptable for me to show vulnerability. And it's the system itself, but it's also a lot of people, right? A lot of people will shame men for sharing their feelings. And as long as we continue to do that, that's where you're getting things like anger and aggression. That's why addictions and suicidality are so common among men who have experienced trauma, right? There's a huge study done in the United States, showed about 80 to 90% of all men who were experiencing homelessness had past trauma in their life from their childhood or later that they never addressed, right? That is not a coincidence. That is not an example of correlation not being causation. There is no way that those two things are not directly linked, okay? And so it's really important to recognize that. And just to kind of hammer home how unfortunate our society can be when dealing with these situations, here's actor Terry Crews. Some of you folks may know him. He's been in some action flicks. He's a main character on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Seems to be, like a pretty genuine person. He's sexually assaulted. He talked about it during the Me Too movement. And then in court, the judge told him that it wasn't sexual assault because God gave him muscles so that he could say no. And so even a man, even with so much privilege, right? He has access to good lawyers. He can certainly pay for counseling, etc. He's a man of great status, is still being ignored by a system that has been set up to not support survivors properly. And so if this can happen to him, it can absolutely be taken as not a stretch that it can certainly happen to people with less privilege, okay? With less status, with less class privilege. So it's really important to recognize that our society does not properly hold space for any survivor and that it impacts people of all genders, okay? Now, survivors in your life look for signals that you're a safe person to talk to. What are you telling them? Who here, and you don't have to answer this particular question, but just think internally. Do you think of yourself as the hero of your own story? It's likely you do. Who knows us better than ourselves? Not many people see themselves as the bad person in a situation, okay? Unfortunately, not all of us get to have conversations that empower our toolboxes to give us tools to actually be the hero or be the ally or be the support person in an instance of sexual violence or responding to a disclosure of sexual violence, okay? So an example I can give you is a few years ago in our community, Bill Cosby was coming to perform. And at that point, he had been accused by so many women over so many different decades. Like the evidence was all but laid out in a courtroom at that point. And there were a lot of people who were saying like, oh, he deserves to come here. He has every right to, innocent until proven guilty, et cetera. And factually, I won't say they were wrong. Factually, according to the law, they were perhaps correct in that. I'll give them that, okay? Here's what I want you to realize. When people go on social media, when they're in their workplaces talking about this stuff, and they're vehemently defending someone who has been accused of heinous crimes by many different people over many different decades, the survivors that are there that you don't even know are there, because everyone has survivors in their life, statistically speaking, okay? This is a ubiquitous, unfortunately, very widespread issue, sexual violence. There are survivors in your life listening to those vehement, those intense ways of defending someone who's been accused of heinous stuff and going, you know what, like, sure, it's your right to argue that right now, but I will never come to you if I need support. And do you want to be someone who's seen as that? Do you want survivors in your life to go, no, I would never ask them for help. I don't trust them. Because I bet you trust yourself. And I bet if I asked you outside of this conversation, if you would help a survivor of sexual violence, you would 100% tell me yes. The problem is there's a disconnect between what we believe and the actions that we show. And our intent and our impact are often and almost always two entirely different things. So it's extremely important to recognize that we're sending signals every day. And we may stumble along the way, that's sure, but continue to learn how to make sure those signals are safe ones, okay? I know a lot of you folks already know this, but it never hurts to have that reminder, right? So let's talk about actual disclosures of sexual violence now. So a disclosure might look like casually mentioned in conversation. It may feel really serious. Someone earlier mentioned the person may not know that what they experienced was sexual violence. So sometimes things are brought up casually. I can tell you, and I'm sure any folks in here that do presentations that work in a community where they have these difficult but very important conversations, it's probably not uncommon for people to come up to you afterwards and be like, oh, like, thanks for that. This one time I was ... And then people often proceed to tell you a situation that absolutely was sexual violence, was sexual assault, is stalking, is voyeurism, has broken their consent, and they didn't even realize the extent of it until they said it out loud or you named it back to them. And so keep that in mind. They may not even realize they're disclosing. And so that's going to take an extra moment of holding space in that situation, okay? They may appear very detached from what they're telling you. That doesn't mean that they're lying. That doesn't mean that it's untrue. If someone's not showing emotions, that could be a coping mechanism. That could be compartmentalization. That could be a whole slew of other things that, again, really aren't a whole bunch of our business, are they? The way someone processes their emotions internally, right? Not really our business. They may not be able to look at you. They may present with deep feelings of shame and guilt. How can I tell if anyone can see or hear me in this webinar? Well, I cannot see you because cameras are turned off, but I did just read your comment that you sent to all panelists. So if you want to share more just to myself and Hannah, you're welcome to do that. If you want to jump in with a question, you can go to the unmute function, which should be near the top left of your screen if your setup is similar to my own. It will likely show a microphone symbol with a red line through it. And then if you click on it, that line will go away and it will allow you to talk. I hope that helps. Feel free to jump in anytime. And keep in mind, so not being able to look at someone, presenting with deep feelings of shame and guilt, just a tech issue. I don't see unmute or a cam, please disregard. I apologize, I'm sorry. I've been doing this for 10 months and there are times where I'm like, why isn't this working the way I want it to? So I feel you, and I'm sure anyone listening right now is probably like, oh yeah, I've been there. So just keep in mind that someone's self-blaming does not mean they are at fault. If someone says to you, this happened to me and it was my fault because I ... I was nice to them earlier in the day. I shouldn't have had that last drink. I shouldn't have wore this shirt. All of those things are things that society has taught people is their fault. It is not. Okay, full stop. There's no caveat to that. It is not the survivor/victim's fault, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that point. I'm happy to debate a lot of points about my presentation. That's one that I will never entertain, right? It is never the survivor's fault. So please, you got to keep that in mind. And it's okay if you go, oh, if you go, oh man, like it seems this or it seems that. Keep that inside. Deal with that yourself. Okay. Oh, thanks for jumping in there, Hannah. So maybe unable to speak or take time to find the words. So patience and empathy and listening are so important. And we're going to talk a bit more about that in just a moment. Just keeping an eye on the time because I want to be very respectful of everyone's time and make sure we get through all the content. People may have an inconsistent story. There may be a lot of confusion. You may be confused. They may not be making very much sense. Keep in mind, the trauma brain and the prefrontal cortex, one cares about making things make sense. The other one does not care about whether you think it makes sense or not. It's going, I'm just trying to protect my body, okay? People may be in an emotional crisis, right? Maybe not at first, or maybe at first. Maybe they break down halfway through. Maybe they come, maybe you can feel their energy. They're coming at you from a place that is so intense. And that's because it is a place that is so intense for them. Okay. So all of these emotions, it's important for you to like take deep breaths and do what you need to do to care for yourself as you're listening, right? Because it's likely that you will vicariously absorb some of these emotions if they are in a crisis, for example. And keep in mind, the crisis may be in the form of body symptoms: headaches, stomach pains, heart palpitations, hyperventilating, panic attacks, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and so if someone needs to calm down, if someone needs medical assistance, that may be part of what is necessary as well. Often people just need to take some deep breaths, okay? But keep in mind, unless you're a medical doctor, if you are in question, it may be a good idea to suggest to them that. But we're gonna get to making decisions for people, so don't stick that in your brain yet. So what can we do if someone discloses outside the workplace? Okay, this is a model that was developed by Ryerson University. Ryerson University does a pretty fantastic job at creating these resources. Farah Khan, I know, if you don't know who that is, you should check her out on Twitter. Wonderful, wonderful educator, scholar, etc. I know that she's a big part of developing the resources, and she's, for me personally, she's been someone that I've really looked up to on this journey. And so I would highly recommend checking her out there. So this model is really good. It takes a lot of abstract concepts, takes a lot of different ways of doing this, and it kind of puts it together nicely. This is on the handout that we're going to be sharing. So don't worry about if you don't want to take notes right now or memorizing it, right? As I kind of blow through it, I'm sure if it's new information, it will seem quick to you. You will get this after, as well as the recording, right? So brave, begin by listening. Okay, and when I say listen to someone, that means you're not waiting to talk. Because I know that as human beings, we love to talk. Like, I'm literally a public educator. I love talking so much. That's not the only reason I became a public educator, but it's certainly a perk for someone who enjoys speaking. And so it's really important to recognize that we need to toggle that switch off in this situation. Often someone will tell us a story, and then we wait till we can tell them the story, but it's a cooler story because it happened to me, not you. This is not the time for that. This is the time to listen and absorb, okay? R, respect confidentiality. Ensure that they understand how and when you will share the information that they have provided you, okay? So important, and we'll talk about this a bit more in the workplace, but like if you have to disclose this information to someone else, if there's a reason that you are a mandatory reporter and have to do a report, et cetera, you need to let the person know where confidentiality is going to be broken, et cetera. It's so vitally important. And we'll explain a bit more about that in a minute, but basically, you know, we know these are sexual violence crimes. These are crimes of power and control. And we don't, if we start making decisions for other people and we don't center them, we are no longer giving them power and control back. We're just taking further power and control away from them. And we want to minimize that as much as possible, especially in your personal life. Confidentiality, unless there's a reason to report, like they're going to self-harm or harm someone else, there really isn't a reason that you should be breaking confidentiality. Like, you don't go tell other people what you just heard, etc. Okay. A, ask what support looks like to them. This is such a simple sentence. Hey, do you need support? They say whatever. Just be like, I want you to know that, like, I respect what support looks like for you. You can share that with me. We'll figure it out together. Okay. Let go of assumptions of what support means, and especially for those of you in here who are able to take on a lot, who are able to stand up and advocate for people. Keep in mind that unless the survivor has asked you to do that, it may not be your place to do so. We may feel helpless because of that. We may feel like we want to just go and do something, okay? But if it's not what the survivor needs, then don't make it about yourself. Don't center yourself in the situation, right? Reporting isn't every survivor's vision of justice. V, validate them. Remind them that they're believed. Whether you say it's not their fault or not, I think is up to you. I think that for some people, they would go, yeah, of course, it's not my fault. And for other people, I think they would say, thank you. And so what I think you do is you listen to them. If you're getting hints of guilt and self-blame, especially if there's any of that victim blaming crap that society teaches, right? Shouldn't walk alone, shouldn't drink, shouldn't do this, all the excuses we make to make perpetrators seem less bad. If any of that comes up, absolutely be like, you know what, it is not your fault. You are not alone. I believe you. There are times where someone will tell you something and you'll say to them, I believe you, and it will be the first time in their entire life someone has said that to them. Okay. There are survivors who have battled against a system that has so systemically oppressed them for so long that they aren't even possibly sure that they believe themselves anymore. And so when you say that to someone, you may want to brace yourself for somewhat of an emotional reaction because it may cause that. And that's totally cool, totally okay. Just recognize that that means, again, patience, give them time, okay? And then E, empathize. Understand everyone has a different way of healing from violence. And for a lot of people, they're not even necessarily at a place where they want to hear about healing yet. Or maybe they are, but you're not the person who's going to help them with that. You're just the person who's there to listen and empathize, okay? Again, we're going to talk about how this gets muddy and how this differs in a workplace and how we can circumvent the problems that come from that in just a moment. So quick rehash, brave model for responding to disclosures. B, begin by listening. R, respect confidentiality. A, ask what support looks like to them. V, validate them. And E, empathize. Okay. And again, you can look this stuff up. It's going to be on the worksheet that we hand out. This is a model that I literally will run through in my head when responding to disclosures. And I want you to know that it's okay to have emotions as well. Okay. So just because sexual violence is common and ubiquitous and accepted in so many circles of our society does not mean it's okay or something a human being should ever have to go through. And so sometimes when you're in these situations, you may need to like take some deep breaths and just be quiet until you're ready to respond. Because sometimes hearing about what's happened to other people can just absolutely shatter you. Okay. It's important to, you got to try not to make it about you. You got to try not to center yourself, but like having emotions is valid. Okay. And matching their energy, like if they're crying and you start crying too, and you're like, I'm sorry, like I'm just emotional. I want to keep listening, etc. And just to reassure them, that's totally cool. Okay. Like no one expects you to be made of iron inside. As a matter of fact, I think it would be interesting or maybe somewhat alarming if people had no emotional response to this, right? It is something that is extremely difficult to hear. And the more of an empath you are, the probably the deeper, the more vicarious trauma you're going to absorb. And so make sure you, after the situation, set up a plan for you to decompress in a healthy way, okay? So please avoid a few things. Avoid pushing for details of the incident. Keep in mind right now, you have your lawyer hat, your HR hat off. You're not doing an investigation right now in this instance, okay? So we're not pushing for details of the incident. We are certainly not judging them for the decisions they've made, right? We're not saying, but why did you go back there? Why did you do this? Why didn't you tell me sooner? And at the bottom, near the bottom, I said, avoid asking why questions. This is exactly why, okay? It serves almost no purpose, okay? It might get you a little bit more information, maybe, probably not even. It's just gonna bring up something that the person already knows, right? Which is that something bad happened to them. And now it's gonna seem like you're not a safe person to talk to because when you start judging them, it makes them feel like it was their fault. And it isn't, again, never their fault. We don't wanna minimize their experience at all. And this is something, I know we're not in the workplace section yet, but this is something that happens in workplaces all the time. No, I know them, they're a good person, they would never do that, you must have misinterpreted. Okay. We don't get to decide what hurts other human beings. You don't get to control other human beings' emotions, ever. Blaming them, we never cast blame. And of course, avoid touching the person. I know many of us are empathetic huggers, right? Like, oh my God, come here, I'm gonna hold you, etc. Especially in this realm of sexual violence, keep in mind what touching them may mean, okay? It may mean that you're doing exactly the same thing that someone else did, touching them against their will without their consent. If they ask for a hug or whatever, and you're comfortable with that, sure. But be really, really careful about this one, all right? And so now let's shift gears a little bit. You folks are doing well. You've listened to me chat for about 40 minutes now. I'm going to continue chatting for about another half hour. Then we're going to take questions and we're going to wrap up probably a few minutes early. Yay, less time on Zoom, right? Awesome. So I want to ask you folks, get your chat boxes ready. Feel free to unmute. Why don't people report sexual violence in the workplace? What's a specific reason someone may not do this in the workplace? So outside of the workplace, it's maybe people don't believe. Maybe their life will blow up. Does this apply in the workplace? Are there similarities? Someone says feel shy. Yeah, totally. Someone said in the Q&A, fear of losing their job, fear of retaliation, impact on reputation, fear of reprisal. They like their job, don't want to ruin the good parts of working there. Yes, yes. Okay, so thank you so much, the person who said that. And another one, your supervisor may be your harasser, not knowing what the workplace policies are about reporting sexual harassment to the employer. Yes, this one is unfortunately very common. Even positive sexual experiences are taboo to talk about, let alone negative ones. Absolutely. It's weird that sex is something that I think it's safe to say the majority of humans will participate in a way, sex means different things to different people, but physical intimacy, and yet we're like never supposed to talk about it. I was talking with a group of adults once in this role since I've been with SASC, and I was using anatomically correct terms. I think it was penis and vulva, and like a few of the people were giggling, adults, because they hadn't heard someone say the word in so long, right? May not have the kinds of relationships where they feel that they can rely on coworkers in that way. Yeah. And we're going to talk about that specifically in a second, but I want to go back quickly to they like their job and don't want to ruin the good parts of working there. This one's really important to recognize because people will often say, oh, why did you stick around? Well, like as if just leaving a job is easy. Number one, yeah, people will tolerate a lot of stuff because of a paycheck is a powerful motivator and there's other good pieces to their job, okay? That doesn't mean the harm that they were experienced is not valid or lesser somehow. People are capable of compartmentalization. People are capable of putting up with and surviving things and simultaneously being harmed in a very significant and valid way. Those two things are not separate. They can coexist, okay? A couple more comments jumped in. They may not want to rock the boat. Consequence reporting sexual harassment may not be worth it to them. Yes, very common. There may be shame associated with the events that preceded the violence. Yes, absolutely. They may otherwise like the person. Totally. Amazing examples, right? So harm, these are just a few over the next few slides that I hear about, that there's a ton of research on, that are very common. Harm caused by someone in a position of power, right? If you're being harassed every day by your boss and you're like, I don't know what to do about it, he or she is best friends with HR. They are HR. Okay. This is a big time reason that people don't want to report. What about worried about losing the job or their hours? Okay. In frontline work, in hospitality, in precarious work situations, which in Canada, 80% of all precarious work contracts are made up of women, by the way. So I'm talking about housekeeping, hospitality, a lot of those types of jobs, okay? And so this, number one, enables people who are in positions of power to continue abusing and harassing people because it's expected there's a high turnover rate. And so if you start a job at a restaurant, you start as a housekeeper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, somewhere where you're in a precarious position, like on a contract, part-time, relief, and you're fighting for hours, and now the person who's scheduling you is the one causing harm, a lot of people say, I'm either going to put up with it because I need the hours, or I'm going to find a different job. And both of those mean that the person is able to continue doing it. And guess what? They know that that's going to happen. They know that they continue doing it. As a matter of fact, a lot of abusers and a lot of serial harassers, they count on society not giving a crap about this stuff. Okay. There's situations where people are getting close to full-time hours or full-time hours, and they're only, if you're on a respite contract in Ontario, your workplace is only they only have to give you 3 hours every 2 months. So if you're getting 40 plus hours a week, and then you accuse so-and-so, and now you're getting 3 hours every 2 months, you basically have lost your job, okay? Lack of action resulting from reporting. Now, In Canada, 25% of people who spoke out against sexual harassment said their management or HR was unresponsive and dismissive, according to Stats Can. So 1 in 4. So you are basically rolling the dice on a 1 in 4 chance that your management straight up will not care. And remember earlier when we were talking about the journey survivors go on to get to the point of disclosure, to get to the point of being courageous and brave enough to do that themselves? So they go through all that, probably on their own. And then it falls on ears that aren't listening, on willfully ignorant ears. Can you imagine the harm and the depth of trauma caused to that person? And 25% of the time, at least, that's what happens, okay? And then of course, person causing harm, same person you should be reporting to. People take advantage of their positions of power all the time. According to Angus Reid, 90% of Canadian women report changing their behavior at work to avoid sexual violence. 9 out of 10 women have said that they have changed their behavior, what they dress, the areas they eat at, the people they talk to, the people they're nice to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 9 out of 10 women in our country in 2020 have to change their behavior out of fear of being sexually harassed. Like, if this doesn't scream, we need more training like this, then nothing ever will. 90%, that's not an anomaly, okay? The anomaly is the 1 in 10 who doesn't experience it. It's considerably more rare not to be harassed. That is so sad. Why else don't people report? Varying views of what constitutes violence. Oh, that's not harassment. No, we're not even gonna file a report. We don't need to do an investigation because you're wrong, okay? If our view of people saying, I'm being harmed and I need support is no, you're not, you're wrong, we have no right to be in that position of authority, okay? Viewing violence and harassment as part of the job. This is extremely common in certain types of workplaces. Racist, sexist remarks are very common in industrial workplaces, okay? Violence and harassment as part of the job is very common among healthcare staff, frontline people. Keep in mind, about 85 to 90% of all frontline healthcare staff in Canada are women and women identified people. Okay, so this is like right now, what are we in? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We know that frontline staff are working harder than they've probably ever had to work since probably the Great Wars. Okay, and we are leaving them out to dry. We have left them out in the cold, I'll say, better analogy. In the middle of this pandemic, going, well, it's just part of the job. If a patient hits you, if a client at your restaurant slaps your butt, that's just part of the job. It's not part of the job. We've normalized it. Because again, it's easy to normalize something that's happening to so many people. It doesn't make it right, okay? Our laws are not up to date. The Department of Justice, by creating this initiative, has taken a great leap forward, right? There really is not a national strategy until this to combat this type of stuff. And this is an amazing step in the right direction. But the territories and the provinces need to keep working, okay? Anything that's provincially or territorial regulated, they need to continue working to update. And finally, I have italicized and underlined worry about retaliation, and I'll tell you why in a moment. A lot of you folks said retaliatory behaviors is a reason people may not come forward. So right now, get your little typey fingers ready. I want to know the percentage of employees who spoke out against workplace sexual harassment, which percentage of them were victims of retaliation? I'll give you a hint, it's above 20%. Sorry, Elizabeth says, what about men? I apologize for missing that, and I don't know what is in context to you, but if you bring it back up, I'd be happy to answer. So we have some 70s, 75, 80, 35, 50s, 75s. I don't think I've ever seen so many accurate guesses. It is 75%. So remember we were rolling the dice on the 1 in 4 chance your manager is just gonna ignore you. Now, let's say you hit the 3/4 chance that people listen and people become aware that an incident happened. Then you get to roll another dice. Am I going to be one of the 1 in 4 who doesn't have to deal with retaliatory behaviors? And this comes from all levels of an organization. Okay, this comes from management. This comes from other staff. This comes from customers sometimes, third-party vendors, right? If you know that people are going to take sides and most of those sides are going to be against you and they're going to make your life a living hell, even if it is already, you're probably not going to come forward. And so this is where getting an organization like SASC that has a grassroots approach, that is on the front line with survivors, listening and supporting them through their journeys for the last 31 years. This is why it's so vitally important to have organizations and other SAC, sexual assault centers across the country doing this work and having a say in the legalities of inside the workplace. Okay, because 75% is an overwhelming amount of retaliatory behavior. It like who can take that? Who can go through what they did, disclose, and then continue being harassed for it as if it's somehow their fault? Does the 75% include bystanders, was asked. It doesn't specifically name bystanders as a separate group, but it did say of people who spoke out against through official channels. So that would likely then include bystanders. So we've highlighted some really big problems here, and let's talk about them, and let's talk about how we can help prevent them, okay? Among survey respondents, 94% of those who reported experiencing sexual harassment were women, while people with disabilities and members of a visible minority were more likely to experience harassment than other groups. So I hope that for most of the folks in here listening right now, you know the term intersectionality. If you don't, when this ends, Google Kimberly Crenshaw intersectionality. The term was coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw to talk about the intersections of people's identities, both internal and external. So what someone could tell you, as well as what society can prescribe to you, okay? Because we make these snap judgments based on people's appearances, their political identities, their social identities all the time. And so often the more marginalized someone is, comes from how many of the identities that we can prescribe or they can share with us. And we know that the systems are not set up in their favor, okay? We know that the systems in North America have very much been created by dudes who look identical to me, who had similar upbringings to me, right? I live in Waterloo Region. Waterloo Region is the tech capital of Canada, and the tech capital of Canada is bearded white dudes. That's literally, it's me and a whole bunch of other bearded white dudes in Waterloo Region. That's what it looks like. That the system was created for us, by us, and that power is continuing to go that direction. And so it's very important to recognize that that actually majorly plays into who is more likely to experience violence because of who does not hold common power in our society, both in a public space and a private space, okay? So let's talk about the barriers to supporting a survivor in the workplace, right? So we know we want to begin by listening. We know we want to respect confidentiality, ask what support looks like, validate and empathize. Now that starts to get pretty muddy here in the workplace. So some of the barriers. In the workplace, we don't necessarily put the survivor first, okay? And if we follow the law to a T, it could be quite difficult to do so. I can give you a quick example. So don't worry about reading the rest of them right now. I'll just give you a really quick example. So in Ontario, the law states that sexual harassment is basically any act, action, or ongoing action that is known or ought reasonably to be known to be unwelcome, right? That's targeted someone for their gender, gender identity, sexuality, sexual orientation, etc. Now, the way that law is written is really interesting to me, because when you say that this action was ought reasonably to be known, let's say that I'm the only openly queer person at my work. I'm fortunate enough that that's very much not the truth. I love my colleagues and I love their who they are, and I count myself among lucky stars that I get to be around a diverse population every day. But let's say I'm working somewhere else, and this is a common thing that I hear about all the time. So I'm the only openly queer person at my work, and management goes, hey, we want to know how people are doing out there. Let's do a survey. It'll be anonymous, and everyone can write down their problems if they have any. And someone in their survey says there's a lot of jokes being made at the expense of queer people, right? There's defamatory, there's discrimination, et cetera. It's always making fun of queer people, gay men in this instance. And then management goes, well, that must have been Chris, right? He's the only gay person, or so we think. So now a couple things are happening. Number one, we're guessing, and guessing it leads to retaliation all the time. When we don't have all the facts, sometimes we make them up for ourselves. Okay, so that's a problem right there. But let's say that it was me who wrote that, and I go, yeah, actually, this is a problem. And the two people I work with, we'll call them J and B, right? J and B, I work with them every day, and they make queer jokes all the time, and I really don't like it. I don't laugh, but hey, they keep going. And so management goes, okay, let's go to HR. And HR goes to them and they're like, hey, J and B, is this true? Is this what's happening? And they go, oh my God, I mean, I guess, but we didn't know it was hurting his feelings. Like, we joke about ourselves all the time. That's just what we do here. It's just that kind of workplace. And HR goes, okay, well, like, you can't do that anymore, because it upset them. It upset Chris in this instance. Then HR comes back to me and they're like, yeah, we talked to J and B, they're sorry, and they're not going to do it again. So now go back to your desk and continue working at 100% productivity like we expect you to. What are the odds that I'm going to go back to my desk and continue working at 100% productivity? Pretty much zero, okay? What are the odds that I'm happy with the way that turned out? What are the odds now that J and B will not massively judge me as a problem, as a person who causes problems, right? Now, let's take the same law, not change a single word, actions targeting sexuality, gender, that are known or ought reasonably to be unknown. The exact same law. Let's take the exact same situation, except this time, management comes to me and says, hey, is this true? Are these jokes happening? And I say, yeah. And they go, okay, we need to go to HR. And then HR listens to me, and then they say to me, okay, so like, what does support, before we even go talk to J and B, it's clear that you've been harmed. It's clear that you're upset. We want to know what support looks like for you. Hey, in our benefits package, you know that we offer counseling. Hey, do you need time off? Hey, do you want to move to a different department? Do you want to move your desk somewhere else? Do you want to move who your direct supervisor is? These are all things that are actually incredibly easy for a workplace to implement. So now I'm starting to feel supported. And then HR goes to J and B and they go, how the heck in 2021 did you think that your actions were not unwelcome? You very reasonably should have known that this is unwelcome. And then action is taken, training is done, right? Maybe punishment if necessary. And now I feel supported, and they're going to correct their actions. The law was applied to the letter, and if the ministry came in, both of those workplaces could show that the law was applied exactly the way it was meant to be applied. But the people using their discretion and depending how many tools in their toolbox they had, completely depended on whether that situation was resolved in a healthy way or not at all, okay? And so when I say it doesn't necessarily put the survivor first, I actually think that's a bit of an understatement. I think that I would be shocked to see where it ever did put the survivor first. And there are a lot of great organizations that are doing really good jobs at saying, you know what, the law is here, we're gonna write policy up here, and we are gonna put the survivor first, and we're gonna make sure people are supported, okay? It can remove choice and power from the survivor. So in Ontario and in most of the provinces and territories that I could find in my research, it is mandatory that once an employer is aware of a situation of harassment or sexual violence, they must conduct an investigation. What if the survivor does not want anyone to know about it? And in your personal life, someone comes to you, they tell you, and you go, do you want to call the police? And they say, absolutely not. I just want you to know, and now I feel better. And you go, okay, cool. How can you do that in a workplace where the law says, no, you have to come forward. You don't have a choice. And if you don't say anything, it's too bad. We're doing the investigation. Okay. Can create a culture of fear and repercussion where the survivor is left out or cast out. A lot of people, after an investigation is done, they still leave their workplace. And if they were properly supported, they may not. Varied levels of training. I say HR training, but really just training, just in general training. And then again, as I touched on, interpretation of the law. These are all valid barriers. There are ways to circumvent them. We're going to talk about that in a minute. If it goes forward for me, here we go. So what can you do if someone discloses in the workplace? First of all, I want you to tell them openly and accurately how you're going to record, share, and store the information they give you. And I mean that, record, share, and store. Okay. I want you to say to the person, I'm taking notes on this pen and paper, and then I'm shredding it. Or I'm taking notes on this pen and paper and I'm locking it up in my desk right here. And I want you to show them where you're locking it up. I want you to respect that they have no reason to trust you. Okay. I want you to respect that that trust needs to be earned, and that what this person is going through is not what you're going through. And that means that they likely have you likely have no idea the depth of what they're going through. So you need to be so careful and so open about how the information they share with you is going to be used. Okay. And then I want you to provide resources, regardless of whether you internally believe this person. Okay. Regardless of whether you think action is going to be taken against the person who's being accused. Okay. I want you to provide those resources either way. And if you're a really small company that can't pay for certain resources, then I want you to be extremely aware of resources in your community. We'll get to that in a minute, so that you can still point them in the right direction. Okay. And keep in mind that this may seem like a lot to you, but if you do nothing or you don't do enough, and they do contact a paralegal or a lawyer that can prove that you did not take accommodation past the point of undue hardship, you may not have a company left at all after that. Okay, so it's extremely important to recognize that you need to take the survivor seriously, because it's the right thing to do first and foremost. They deserve that. But also, I just want to put it out there, don't forget about legal litigation and how much it can cost organizations. Okay. And then ensure they know that support is available regardless of that investigation outcome, and apply the BRAVE model as much as possible. So maybe you will have to ask some questions. That doesn't mean that you can't still just listen, that you can't let them disclose, empathize with them, validate them, right? Say, like, you know, obviously, like, you've been harmed here. That's obvious to me. Okay. You can apply the BRAVE model in the disclosure and give them as much time as they need before you begin an investigation that day, sort of thing, right? Like, you can sit there with a person. You have to start the investigation within 3 months in Ontario. I apologize if that's slightly different in certain provinces and territories, but basically an investigation is going to be done, but that doesn't mean that you just throw the BRAVE model out the window. You still need to be there for that person, okay? That's a part of a company. Guess what? Every single business in this entire world has one thing in common, and that's that it needs people, or it doesn't matter. If there are no people left in the world, there's not a single business that still matters, okay? So we need to respect the people that make up our organization. And in an instance like this, that is probably going to feel intense, etc., remember the BRAVE model. It will really help you through. And what can you do now? First of all, investing in training for all your staff and management, not just certain people, okay? Coming to training like this is a great entry point. For some of you, you may be really aware of this stuff, so that's not so much an entry point as a continuation of your learning, but by no means is this the end of the journey of learning, right? This is like another piece of it. There are other people who do this work who are incredible. There are other people who have a slightly different perspective. There are people with different lived experiences. There are people with different identities, and they can bring value too, okay? It doesn't have to be a dude who looks like me doing this training. It's incredible that we have men doing this training now, and I think it's important because I think it gets through to men in a conversation that otherwise hasn't been geared towards men, unfortunately, and so that's important. But please know that this is the beginning, okay? That, yeah, are we providing good resources, good advice, smart practices? Of course, that's what we aim to do in our public education department. But please, please know that you can continue learning about this stuff, and so can all your staff, right? Whether you're a lawyer listening, whether you work at a SAC, whether you just work at an organization and you want to learn about this stuff, you can, there's resources. And then understanding power, privilege, and intersectionalities. Recognize that people will have different levels of comfort with you based on who you are, what you look like, etc. Based on their oppressions and privileges, based on your own, based on their identities, based on your own, okay? When our pub ed, we have a public education team here in Waterloo Region, and when they go out, I can tell you that the amount of disclosures that our women identified staff take are significantly higher than the ones that our men identified staff take, right? Intersectionality plays into that. Power and privilege plays into that. Okay, so it's important to recognize that and recognize how you can help make people feel comfortable in despite of that as well. And then updating policies and procedures. And this is really important, based on feedback from gender-based violence organizations. So it's great if you like Google what the new law is, and it's great if you have a law background, et cetera. But people in GBV organizations that have been doing this work for decades, you cannot get better expertise than that. Have them review it. You don't have to take every single thing they say. I get it. There are certain ways policies need to be written, but understand that their analysis is going to be extremely beneficial at you creating good policies around this, okay? And then identify barriers to reporting and minimize them. So do people, earlier people were talking about not knowing how to report, not knowing where to report, not knowing what the policies are. Are you training your staff on that? Or is it a piece of paper you set down on the new person's desk and they say, I'll be back in a half hour, read it over and sign it, and then that's their onboarding process? And it's a piece of paper that they skimmed and may not have ever remembered a word from. Or do you actually train people on it? Do you bring speakers in to talk about that stuff? Do you do training like this, right? Extremely important. And so also, not just gender-based violence organizations, but reaching out to local organizations to learn about what supports are available in your community is so helpful. So in a minute, I'm going to share some national resources that you can sort of kickstart your learning with. But I'm going to tell you that probably the best learning you can do is from local grassroots nonprofit organizations that have been fighting the fight of whatever realm they're in. Okay, those people know so much and should never be discounted. And so again, if you maybe don't know what supports are available in your community, start looking around and find out, so that the next time you deal with a situation like this, be like, hey, were you aware of this? Did you know about? And in this way, you're empowering the survivor to make decisions that feel good for them. They go, oh my God, I didn't know about that. Thank you. And this one does work for me. This other one doesn't work for me. I'm going to go this place. Or, hey, just knowing there's stuff out there, that might be enough too. But you can't share that stuff if you don't know about it. And so many of us go to work, come home, and we never see what's happening in the community around us. So we want to combat that, because it's going to add more tools to our toolbox of responding. And so some resources. I want to give a huge shout out to my public education manager, Jessica St. Peter, because the two at the top she found. I also want to give a shout out because they have a whole bunch of like really well peer-reviewed research. So now I have hundreds more pages to read. So also thanks for that, my manager. Just kidding. But so seriously though, the CSA group did an incredible white paper called Preventing Violence and Harassment in Canadian Workplaces. You can Google that term. I checked last night and the exact PDF will show up. Makeitourbusiness.ca seems to have a lot of really good resources. Now, it is about workplace domestic violence, but keep in mind, there's a lot of overlap in the learning here. So it's still very important to know about. If you're curious about what federal employment standards, health, safety, employment equity, and pay equity looks like, you can call the toll-free number 1-800-641-4049, and they will help you. Again, I will always support reaching out to your local organizations, but just know that that's there. I also want to give a shout out to PLEAC, okay? Wonderful resource. And I've now met a bunch of people from PLEAC, worked with some people from PLEAC, including Hannah, and like they know their stuff and they care. They're people that absolutely like we can look to, okay? CUPE, it doesn't matter if you're unionized or not, you can still go on their website and check out their resources. The Canadian Union of Public Employees, they actually have a lot of really good resources. And I was vetting their responding to disclosure training, and you know, me being from Sask, I'm like, oh, ours is so good. I'm gonna read this so intensely, and I'm gonna find errors. I didn't. I thought it was fantastic. So very much I recommend it. And then I put the Sexual Assault Support Center here, Waterloo Region, as a resource for you, because it is. You can go to our website. We often do public sessions that you can attend, regardless of territory or province where you are, right? But also, I want you to think for a second how you could replace that logo with a logo in your own community. Maybe you are the logo in that community. Maybe you are from a SAC and you're listening to me speak right now. Then make sure that people know that you're a resource. And yes, I know, I work in nonprofit. Not everybody wants to listen. I get it. I listen. I listen, okay? So please know that those resources are available. Again, I just want to quickly drive home 24-hour support line, 519-741-8633. It's been running nonstop for 31 years, okay, since 1989. Amazing work by volunteers, expert volunteers. And then emails, if you're looking for more information, you can, if you don't want to email me directly, if it's something that you want to talk to someone else about, or you just don't want to talk to me for whatever reason, I want you to know that you can email info@saskwr.org. I do not answer those emails, right? So you can talk to someone else in the organization. If you want to talk to me, if you want to learn more about our workshops or anything else, you have questions we didn't get to today, workplaceeducator@saskwr.org. You can email me anytime. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. And if there's any questions, any comments, etc., now is a wonderful time. And then as those wrap up, we will wrap up. So I just want to give a huge shout out again to Hannah for having us, and a huge shout out to everyone for all your participation. I know coming into a session that's about a topic that can feel heavy, a session that is recorded, etc., that can give you some very valid anxiety, etc., about participating, and it's okay if you didn't, but I also think it's wonderful for the folks who did, so thank you.
Chris, that was amazing. Thank you so much for that presentation. It felt absolutely like a workshop, and thank you to everyone for chatting and participating as well. That's fantastic. I would absolutely love if there were questions, like I said, Q&A, like Chris said, use the chat. And I see a few coming in. I just wanted to address one, Chris, before we address the ones coming in now. You mentioned that someone did say something about what about men. I did catch that it was in reference to the slide about the 90% of women alter their behavior or themselves to avoid sexual violence. So that question was in relation to that, if you wanted to answer it.
Yeah. So what I'll say to that is we don't know. And it hurts my heart that we don't know. It really does. It really bothers me that we haven't been able to have enough meaningful conversations about how men are impacted by sexual violence, because we've kept it hidden for so long, and we've told men to keep feelings to themselves. Okay, that really bothers me as a human being, as a male identified person. That really bothers me. I want us to get to a point where we have those stats, but we don't. And so I do talk about this stuff in a somewhat gendered and a somewhat binary way. That's because that's what we know. That's the best of our knowledge, okay? But please, absolutely, I want to be clear, I hold space for all survivors of sexual violence, and we know that there's way more that we'll never learn about in the current society that we live in.
Absolutely. Thank you for answering that, Chris. And I think we have a few more questions coming in. So one question is, do you have any recommendations on good ways to engage with workplaces and organizations on this issue right now, given that so many people are working from home?
Yeah, absolutely. So our Raise the Bar program, we do this work. We've been doing it online since last March. It's 307 days now, I think. We've been working remotely. And so we took our resources and we made them as digital as we possibly could. We do things through email, we do things through Zoom, through Teams, etc. And you'd be surprised right now, there's a lot of organizations that you might get to work with that you otherwise wouldn't have, because they're trying to keep their employees engaged. Okay, and so you can play up to that. You can say, hey, we can offer this over a lunch hour, for example. It can be a couple 1-hour sessions, et cetera, et cetera. And so don't be afraid to reach out to those organizations and position yourself as, it sounds to me like you're a funded project, you're an expert in what you're talking about. Don't be afraid to position yourself as such. Organizations do need this training, and a lot of times they don't know where to turn either. So don't be afraid about sending that email, right? Giving your pitch, attaching a document. Like, you're the expert and you should be in there. People deserve to learn about the tools you have in your toolbox.
Okay, perfect. And I see, just trying to balance out, there's a few in Q&A too, but I see there's a lot of things flooding in, which is a fantastic, a lot of positive feedback. I think as well, people are curious about the slides, if there's going to be access to that. So Chris, it's up to you. If you want to send them my way, I can distribute those as well.
We will. Yep.
Perfect. So I'll get the slides to make sure everyone has that. Everyone will get the handout. Everyone will get the recording as well. And there will be just a brief survey that I will be including as well, that I saw in the chat as well.
Yeah, so I can speak to that for a moment if you want. So Jessica shared the survey. Take that survey and be completely honest. You're not going to hurt my feelings, okay? I want you to say exactly what was good and exactly what needed to be improved. And the reason for that is because I want this program to be awesome and represent people it needs to represent. This program is not about me, right? This program is about supporting survivors and making sure people can have a healthy workplace, and that goes beyond me. So please, make sure that that you do the survey if you're able to.
Perfect. And just to jump to the Q&A really quickly, someone said, just sorry if you addressed this, but can you speak for a minute about how to reconcile work disclosures of sexual violence with the duty to investigate, or if someone doesn't want the complaint disclosed?
Yeah. Yeah, no worries, no worries. That's probably one of the biggest tricky things, because you're removing power and confidentiality from someone. And so what you can do is, first and foremost, you let them know exactly how you're going to use the information. Don't let anything surprise them. Tell them what information is being kept, who is going to have access to the information, exactly what the investigation is going to look like moving forward. Because yeah, by law, you do have to do that investigation. And that may really upset the survivor. But by law, you have to. And so just keep in mind that you can still center them at the center of the investigation, right? Keep them informed, give them choice, give them the time off, give them the counseling, give them the community resources. These are all things you can do to minimize or mitigate some of the damage that can be caused by the mandatory investigation process.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. And I see one here that I think everyone is able to see as well. But Chris, do you find that organizations need some support, information that couches sexual harassment as sexual violence? I find it difficult for people to see sexual harassment serious, harmful, and as on the spectrum of sexual violence.
Yeah, they do. Absolutely. I think you're absolutely onto something there. And I try and always mention at least once in any presentation I'm talking about regarding sexual violence that you cannot rank harm. And it is never up to us to decide for someone else what is harmful and what isn't harmful. Okay, and so it may seem to you internally as something that's not serious, but if someone is telling you about it, it is serious enough to them. And that's all that should matter. And so, yeah, absolutely. I try and when I'm working with new workplaces specifically, the first presentation I give, it's very common that I will talk about what sexual violence means, the umbrella of sexual violence, right? And how rape culture as a pyramid, how these seemingly non-serious actions and behaviors at the bottom absolutely prop up and enable what you may consider as more serious crimes, right? And so we try and talk about that, because you're right, organizations, and I want to be really clear, this isn't because people are bad people, right? We don't have the tools in our toolbox. Like, the stuff I was taught growing up about consent was so terrible. It was no means no. It was never about, does this feel good? Are you enthusiastic? Do you have the option to say no and yes without fear of reprisal? Is it real consent? And so the stuff we've been taught growing up, and the stuff we're still being taught by a lot of society, is absolute garbage, right? For lack of a better term. And so it's important to remember that people may be coming from a place of they may not have the right information. They may not have any information. And so we want to be patient. We want to provide that information as educators, right? That's our goal.
Thank you, Chris, for that. And thank you everyone for your positive feedback. I hope that this was very useful to everyone. I hope everyone got a lot of information from this. I don't see any other questions coming in now. If there's any last minute ones, feel free. But otherwise, Chris, up to you if you're ready to sort of wrap up. If anyone has questions, of course, after the fact, please feel free. Everyone has my email. Feel free to email me. I'm going to provide, again, Chris's direct email as well as the general SASC email to follow up with. So everyone's going to be able to access that. If you have anything else that you want to sort of address after the fact, there's going to be plenty of time. Chris, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the effort, the fantastic presentation. It was great. Like I said before, everyone's going to get everything in an email after this. So essentially that's it. So thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thank you, Chris, and we'll see everyone again really soon.
All right, thanks, folks. Take care, and good luck in all of your initiatives across Canada. You all are doing fantastic work, and we're inspired by it every day, right? We got to keep inspiring each other, especially during this difficult time.
Exactly, it's perfect. Thank you so much, Chris.
Take care, folks.
Bye, everyone.